I'm ready. I'm rolling.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Carlos Howard of Carlos A. Howard Funeral Homes. Some of you may know me, and some of you may not. I am a mortician from Norfolk, Virginia, and I started a concept 19 years ago with regards to online marketing. Having done so, you would think that when you are innovative and creative and performing such feats, that the world would appreciate it, but that's not the case. A few years ago, my board of funeral directors and embalmers, set out to violate my constitutional rights by violating due process to me in terms of the 14th Amendment. They created a scenario saying that I gave a family body parts, but which is furthest from the truth because I didn't even have custody of the remains. Secondly, they came in and used a tactic as to what they call summary suspension. Summary suspension gives them the authority to cause a healthcare practitioner to cease and desist in their operations, not only from their facility, but from their personal license as well. And they did this without notifying me. They had a hearing or a meeting prior to the hearing of an ex parte hearing and didn't notify me. And what made it worse, during that process, one of the board members posted it on his Facebook that he had to go to a meeting. That member was Eric Ray. That he had to go to a meeting concerning a practitioner's livelihood. And then they had the meeting and they voted to get a summary suspension to take my license and my facilities license. Now you might say, why? Well, I stated earlier that I came up with a concept some 19 years ago to create an economic funeral for people who just didn't have the money. And my cousin and I, Rodney Jordan, suggested that we go online. At that time, the internet was relatively new. So we logged on April in 1995 on a Sunday, and by that afternoon we had better than 20,000 hits. By Wednesday, I was in Newsweek on ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox News, did interviews with Fox News, and in every major newspaper in the country. But most recently, this board came in using what's known as a summary suspension that really didn't even apply to me. And the reason that I believe that they did so is because the only way that I could be stopped in the funeral industry is that they take my license. And they had to have something that they said was terrible enough to do, which is furthest from the truth. There's a saying that goes that he who steals my purse steals filth and rags. It enhances him none, but it leaves me exceedingly poor. I would like to clear my name and tell my side because I've never had an opportunity to do so because my rights to due process has been violated. In lieu to all of the government cover-ups as it relates to black-on-black crime, police departments, covering up murders of innocent citizens, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this to light as to the economic murder that has happened to me, and yet I'm still living to talk about it. This has not just been germane to me, it has occurred to several others in this community that I know of. It started out with Milton Reed, who was an advocate for civil rights, who brought in Minister Farrakhan, and he was followed and questioned, and Dr. King. He and Dr. King were very close friends. Bishop Willis, who was a radio magnate, they came after him. Sonny Cuffey, a relative of mine, they came after him. Herman Valentine, who had Systems Management, one of the largest IT firms in America. They came after him to destroy him. James Gay, and then, me. And there are a lot of others, but these are the individuals that I know that are innocent as it relates to being falsely accused of something to destroy their credibility and their relations with the community. Backing to this summary suspension, I was called about 6 o'clock that afternoon by an attorney that I had used before out of Northern Virginia, Kimberly Murphy, who I had not retained for any other matters because of the fact that the services that I had her for were no longer needed because those issues were resolved. And she had called me and asked me, did I have knowledge that there was a board action taken against me relative to a summary suspension? And I said, no, I wasn't aware. And I asked her, what is summary suspension? And she said it's a new concept that the Attorney General of Virginia had given the Health Professions Board to use to suspend immediately a practitioner's ability to practice. And I said, no, I wasn't notified. She said, well, her assistant just happened to be at the board, and they heard them talking, and they called your name, and she called her, Kimberly Murphy, to see if I had knowledge of it because she knew that I was a client or had been a client of hers. So she had her assistant to call me, and she explained to me what happened. This was at 8 o'clock that night, and they were coming the next day to close my facility down. I immediately called two friends of mine who were attorneys and explained the situation to them. And the first thing that morning, they set out to get an injunction to stop it. And the only judge available was the chief judge, and he granted it, the order, but then he assigned it, or I believe that the Attorney General's office judge shopped and got a favorable judge by the name of Judge Burrell, and she was reluctant. In fact, she did, after the fact, she did not grant me the injunction. It was a 45-day wait before I would actually have an opportunity to be heard. And she made the statement, Judge Karen Burrell, saying that there would be no irreparable harm done to Mr. Howard by waiting 45 days for a hearing. That meant that I would have to sit and not operate, nor could I earn any money. Now, mind you, I had 9 funerals there. Well, 9 or 10. It was 5 Caucasian families and 6 black families. And they were telling me that I would have to get all of those families out and get them to other funeral homes so that those families would have to go through that process again. And I vehemently told them that I was not going to do it. And if they wanted those families to move, they would have to contact each and every one of them and state the reason why. So the judge agreed to allow me to fulfill the services to those families that I was contracted for. Now, mind you, not a problem one way or the other, but yet and still, I was deemed an immediate danger to the community. And what's worse about it, they ordered at least 14 deputies, 2 van loads of Norfolk Sheriff's deputy under the orders of Bob McCabe to come and to close me down. Now, Bob McCabe himself called me and said that he was just giving me a courtesy call to let me know that they were coming to close me down. And I didn't let him know that I already knew that they were coming and had taken measures to prevent that from happening. So after he hung up, then I began to get calls from the press, the media, saying, are you aware that you're going to be closed down? And I told them no. And I said, for what reason? And this has been my question the whole part long. And they said, according to the sheriff's report, that you gave human body parts to a next of kin. Now, to leak that kind of lie to the press is just crazy. I'm a graduate of 2 mortuary colleges. I've studied under the guys who wrote the books that other people study from. I've developed procedures and practices in this industry that a lot of people use today. Albeit I probably won't get any credit from it, but most people know because this is a very closed industry. But nevertheless, to destroy one's integrity amongst the client base. Now, we're doing multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious services, and everybody's coming because of the fact that we've been fair about our prices and providing a definite need to people at a very fair and low cost. And the board itself consists of, at that time, of 4 sitting board members who are in my immediate market share. Bob Ullman, I'm going to talk about him a little later. Eric Ray, at the time he was manager of Community Funeral Home, whereas we sued that funeral home before. Bob Ullman is owner and president of Ullman Funeral Home, in which my lawyer, Billy Robinson, had told me some things about him from years gone by. And Mike Leonard, did I tell you Mike Leonard from H.D. Oliver? And a citizen consumer member, Julius Williams, who is a citizen member, who I don't believe, and I hope and pray that he did not vote to suspend my license, because based on the fact that he is a citizen member, he wouldn't have the insight as to what actually occurs in our industry. But nevertheless, this is the consistency of the board composition, and there is no way that they, being directly in competition with me, and then the others being in competition with me based upon what we do via the internet, that they were going to give me an unbiased outcome. It's happened 19 years ago, and it's the same thing today, but they figured out that the only way that they could stop me was to take my license, and they had to come up with something hideous enough to do so. And mind you that this offense that they said, this allegation, occurred several months prior to. It was January when they came up with the summary suspension, and this is in 2013, and this suspension, this incident was supposed to have happened in July of 2012. So you've got months in between that an individual has funeralized maybe 100 or so families, but he's a danger to the public, and without any complaints. Now, talking about this ex parte hearing, this ex parte hearing is supposed to have noticed me that I would have a right to see and hear and question my accusers. I never did. The complaint came from a Nick's funeral home in Philadelphia, as well as their assistant, who looked like they had just picked him up off the street. Now, violating someone's constitutional rights, especially one's right to life, living in the pursuit of happiness. You take away my income, you take away my relations in the community, and you create a scenario that is supposed to be a calming industry to those who look upon you and that you care for in the community, and yet you create all of this drama to make people believe that you did something horrible, and that's why we have to have all of this law enforcement for records, something like this. It's the craziest thing, but that is the playbook as to how government has been able to make the appearance of black men and black businesses look horrible. And it's wrong. It's just absolutely wrong. Now, this all started back in 1995. As I told you earlier, when my cousin and I were looking over putting me on, developing a website, because during that time we would have been the first one to even have a website. And I said, well, let's take it one step further. Let's put our prices up there and offer it to the entire the country. And I made an agreement with FedEx and the shipping companies and various airlines that I could get you your merchandise within 24 hours. And I sent several to California, as far away as Japan, Finland, New Jersey, South Carolina, everywhere. And the families were 100% pleased. But the industry was radically upset because of the fact that there was a new dimension added to the industry. Mind you that the only improvements to our industry or advancements to our industry was going from a horse-drawn hearse to a motorized one. That's as far as our industry has advanced in 150 years. And God used me to advance the industry. Now everybody has a web page, but no one's taking the advantage of the fact that they could cut the cost to the consumer by offering these various amenities to them, and that they can get it in the privacy of their own home. So to make it go away, they created a situation where I couldn't practice by violating my due process. And the individuals that were involved, he is now, the first instance was Bob Ullman. Now, my lawyer, Billy Robinson, I didn't know this until after his services were finalized, and he was sickly and about to die, and he told me that he had given Bob Ullman the funds to establish his funeral home. Now, what a conflict. Now, here's a guy that's my friend, you know, supporting him while he's in political office and helping him stay there. And he, you know, send my car and my men when he's sick and couldn't get to and from work, that they would push him in a wheelchair from courtroom to courtroom in the cases that he had in his last days. And when he told me this, I was like crushed. And when Billy actually died, he called, well, his wife had called Bob Ullman to provide cremation services for him. And I had asked his wife, I said, Billy is a nationwide statesman. Can we have a memorial service, irrespective as to what had been done to me? It was looking at this man who had written laws for all of the people in this Commonwealth. He died, and there was an utterance mentioned about his passing other than he had died. No services or memorial or recognition of his accomplishments were had to this day ever been done publicly. So then there comes Kenny Alexander, who is in fact a sitting senator in the Commonwealth of Virginia. This started back in 1995, or really, I started in 1997, but the brunt of it came from in 1997 when the board took an action against me again. And what they had done was initially they wrote me a letter and said that I was selling pre-need funerals online, which was against the law, and I was selling caskets online, which was against the law. Well, this is a new industry. There were no laws to govern it. So I wrote them back and told them I believe that you all are treading heavily upon the antitrust laws of America. And then 2 weeks after that, they charged me with having unlicensed embalmers. Now, which is crazy. I'm basically starting a new business and doing all of my casework, and anybody who knows me knows that I'm a stickler for perfection. And making the educational investments that I have, graduate of 2 mortuary colleges, going all over the country for seminars and things of that nature. Why in the world would I jeopardize that in terms of for that? I'm already giving away services and, you know, already, so why would I do that? But anyway, this letter came February 17th, 1997. And mind you, this letter was written to every funeral home in the state of Virginia. And at the time, Mr. Kenneth Alexander was the president of the Virginia Funeral Directors Association, and Mrs. Imogene Bennett was the president of the Norfolk Funeral Directors Association. And it's from Ann Stinson from Detroit, Michigan. And she writes a letter saying, subject Carlos Howard, I'm writing you of a situation I ran into this weekend. I was selling a pre-need Batesville Classic Gold Bronze. I quoted my client a price of $7,500. They showed me Carlos Howard's homepage viewing via Melanet listing the same casket of $200 over cost, which costs $3,921. I don't know about the funeral directors in Norfolk and in Virginia, but I know this hurts my business in Detroit. And I'm very upset with the unprofessional, unethical behavior. I am informing my Batesville representative, Jim Marshall, of this situation, and I am informing your Batesville representative, Dan Rukoff. If this problem is not eliminated, I will go right to the top of Batesville management ladder until it is. This affects all funeral directors, black and white, adversely. It is enough that we have to deal with cemeteries selling our caskets and vaults, and now they are selling our services. It is unattainable to me that a funeral director would not be aware of the fact that he is damaging the credibility of the industry and the funeral director personally by price advertising on the internet. Good luck. I will continue to confer with you on this issue. Ruth Stinson. Now, this is a letter that I used in a lawsuit against Mrs. Stinson. I sued her and Stinson individually, Family Insurance in Michigan Corporation, Emma Jean Bennett individually, Community Funeral Home, a Virginia corporation, Kenneth Alexander individually, and Virginia Funeral Service Incorporated, a Virginia corporation trading as Metropolitan Funeral Service. This is a Norfolk Circuit case, court law number L98-407, and this letter was Exhibit A. Now, I don't know about you, but they put a tremendous weight on Batesville Casket Company by dragging them into this. And sort of like the majority rule won because of the fact that in doing so, Batesville rewrote some of its shipping policies, whereas I would order the casket and they would drop it to the receiving funeral home. So what they did was that, which I didn't mind, that I would have to order the unit and get it from Norfolk, Virginia to California, for an example. And FedEx shipping was excellent in doing it, and we were still able to get those merchandise to their destination in a timely fashion. Now here is the subsequent letter that came from Mrs. Stinson to Mrs. Bennett again. It's Exhibit C in the lawsuit. Dear Mrs. Bennett, it was nice visiting with you today. I did talk to Kenny after I spoke with you. He indicated, being Kenny Alexander, indicated that the problem is supposed to have been corrected, but it has not. And then she makes mention that she's going up the ladder to the casket company. And then she says, I look forward to meeting you personally when the convention is in Norfolk, and it should be great meeting with you. Now, subsequently, after that, these letters had gone out, and I had no knowledge that this was taking place. One of my friends in the local industry looked at me as if though I were a dead man and said, "You don't know what's happening to you, do you?" And I said, "No." And well, anyway, she pulled out these two letters that had come in the mail to her, and I read them, and hair stood up on my head. And then and she said, "Well, you go ahead and keep them. You can have them because you might need them." So I took them, and while I was hurt and frustrated about it, a few days later, I get this fashion that I'm having a hearing. Well, I never got notice of the hearing, but they came up with letters, that certified letters saying that they had sent me notice and this, that, and the other. Well, anyway, subsequently, they had held either an informal meeting, no, a formal hearing, and then voted to revoke my license. This is back in 1997. And indefinitely, and fined me $7,500. Now, fortunately, I had, licensed individuals. In fact, I had management set up that one would manage from 7 to 3. The next one would take over from 3 to 11, and the next one would from 11 to 7. So we were always covered, so that it didn't interfere with the operation of the business. And I served in the capacity of a consultant until we tried to revise this. Then they started coming after the licensed individuals, and then they raided my place. The board ordered a raid to close me down. They came in with automatic loaded weapons, about 10 of them. The local state police person, the SBI, State Bureau of Investigation, and one Norfolk police officer, which they had asked the Norfolk police to come, but nobody would want to do it because they knew me and they knew the kind of person that I was. So one black officer volunteered to come, and I believe that it was for my own safety because those people were going to kill me that day. They had all of this live weaponry and dressed in their SWAT attire, as you'll see by example later, and they only wanted was 13 of these, subpoenaed 13 of these. But all the commotion that it created in the community with them surrounding my place, all of the neighbors in the community came out to see what's going on with Mr. Carlos. So as it would happen, I was talking to my attorney at the time, Billy Robinson, whom I told me about things about Bob Oman, and attorney Stanley Sachs. And they told me to look at the warrant, see what it called for, and comply. And that's what I did. I gave them the 13 files that they had subpoenaed. And that wasn't enough. They tore up my office as though they were looking for drugs or something. And I mean, literally tore it up. And then one of the state police told me to get off the phone because my attorneys, I was on a landline and a cell phone, and get off the phone. And I said, I've complied with you. My attorneys, I'm talking to my attorneys. And he said, get off the phone. And he unplugged the landline phone and went to grab this phone out of my hand. But in the meantime, he was coming at me as he was going to hit me. And when his fist got this far, I immediately grabbed it, cut the circulation off and twisted it, and it was on. A fight broke out, and I literally tried to break his neck. because I was in compliance, and I knew if I had to die that day, I was going to die standing for doing what's right. And as evidence, those guys were intending to kill me that day because they bought all, and they have the film. I have the film of them coming in, doing that. And they jailed me. And by that time, the street was tremendously full of people. And I never will forget this woman, Najma Richardson, who's gone, died. And she asked the police, and I told them, I said, you guys need to fix my clothes up, because if you take me out in the street looking like this, you're going to have a rod on your hand. So we straightened up, my clothing, and they took me out and put me in a police car. And, then I was because I was lifting weights and I couldn't put my hands behind my back because it would cut off my circulation. So they put on another set of handcuffs to alleviate the pressure. So all of that in saying, Mr. Alexander's van was across the street in it, watching, looking to see what would take place when they brought me out, to jail me. And then from that, with the fine and all of that, being a small black business, no banks lending you any money, you have to self-finance yourself. So I would do that by selling my cases for discount so that I would have a return on cash flow quickly. And I filed for Chapter 11, reorganization for my company, because I just knew that the adverse publicity was going to harm me. They put me in jail and they put it all over the television. And before I could get out of jail, I had at least 10 death calls. I mean, the phone was ringing. And one family member said, no, I'm not going to call anybody else because Mr. Carlos will be out of jail. He knows what he's doing. And just as she was saying that and they were watching him, I was walking through the door. And she said, I told you that he would be out. And their dad was laying in the back room on the bed. This is how much confidence that the people had in me and what we did. So I filed for reorganization. Mrs. Elizabeth Tisdale, who was the board executive secretary, and Mr. Roscoe Roberts, who was the assistant attorney general, came down to my trustee hearing as a creditor because I put all of my indebtedness in this reorganization so that I could pay it down. And they told the trustee that you should discard Mr. Howard's request for reorganization because it is very doubtful that he would be able to fulfill it because he would be arrested as soon as he walks out of this door. And sure enough, they did have someone there, and the trustee looked rather strange, and he says, no, I'm going to grant him his petition. They were upset. I knew the building that I was in, so I didn't go out the front door when my car was parked. I called one of the news stations, and I called my friend to pick me up. He was on a story. He had one of his other reporters to meet me, and I surrendered in their custody. And by the time we got to jail, he was there, and they had paid my bond. This is the extreme as to how the Commonwealth of Virginia in its playbook, if you do the right thing as a black man, educate yourself, return to your community. I had the opportunity to go anywhere in the community and in the state, but I chose to go back to a community, or rather I was sent to a community by God, to show people that they could be successful and that there was another way of doing things rather than vice and crime. And ever since I took that stand, that neighborhood went from a ghetto to an up-and-coming neighborhood in its business corridor. And then they come back several years later with the same individual, Robert Ullman, on the board. And we asked him to recuse himself. We asked this board to set up a hearing officer because the conflicts are just obvious. But they wouldn't do it, and they said that the state gave them the authority to. And you'd be surprised the investigations when we subpoenaed to get the records, the surveillance film, the wiretappings, I look pretty good going down the street with my funeral procession. I'm thinking I've got, outmoded cars, but, we look tremendously professional. And all behind an innovative idea. Now, I don't believe it's so much because I was black as it was for the fact that of the money. Uber, Amazon.com, and Lyft does today the same thing that I did 19 years ago. A friend of mine, Bill Thomas, told me at the time, and he has been an expert witness throughout this ordeal, anti-board and what they did, stating that they had to come against you because you interrupted the money flow to them by being innovative. And to this day, no one in the funeral industry has chosen to opt to show how families in such a crucial time in their life, how they can be provided a service and reduce the cost. But because they have these big box buildings and millions of dollars of an investment, and my facility was very nice, but it had a window air conditioning in it, and these guys are saying this is a threat to them. And they use some harsh, evil, extreme measures, even to the assault upon my life. And looking back at it today, based upon how so many young black men have been murdered for nothing. And there was a gun in my office. They never bothered the gun because I had a permit, to carry it. And a member of any NRA got training and certified through them. They never said anything about the gun. It was their intent, I believe, if I had gone for that gun or done anything to protect myself, they would have killed me. But the intent was to pick that fight so that I would defend myself against the police, so that they would charge me with a felony and be convicted, and they would never have to worry about me getting a license to practice again. You charge them with a felony, immediately your professional license goes out the window. So that didn't work, so they trump up charges saying from another funeral home that I told them to give human intestines, viscera, to the next of kin. And I didn't even have custody of the remains. And the family signed a release, so stating that when those remains left my facilities, I would be no longer responsible. So on that note, you have Mr. Kenny Alexander, Mrs. Imogene Bennett, who is now deceased, Eric Ray, who was sitting on the board, Bob Ullman, who was sitting on the board, um, Julius Williams, and all of these local, right in the immediate market. And one family had told me, it says, H.D. Oliver was their funeral director. And this man was a very prominent barber. And he cut the hair for most of the judges and lawyers from downtown. And he said that he wasn't going to use them because of the fact that I was an honest man. And his son died, and I funeralized him, and another son died, and I funeralized him. And to this day, he's been calling me and checking on me. And these are the kinds of things that these guys have done to discredit, and they've perverted and used the law to justify their doing, but they didn't expect that a person like myself would understand the law. And I tried to abide by the law, hoping and waiting. But they charged me $12,000. They fined me $12,500 on a lie as to what somebody allegedly said that I said. And I didn't have the opportunity to defend myself. In fact, the various cases that they tried to charge me with, which is a matter of public record, you can get it. 2 families, and I don't even do pre-arrangement, I do spin downs to help senior citizens to protect their income. When they get sometimes an excess of funds, either through some overage or backlog of Social Security and Medicaid, they can't hold that money unless they run the risk of losing their Medicaid and Social Security, Medicare benefits. So they allow them to do a spin down. One family that I would name Client A, she came into me, made those arrangements. I used to live across the street from them, and their family and myself got pretty close. Her aunt was relatively aged, so I agreed to do a complete funeral for her for $1,500. And the only thing that she had to pay for was the cost of the casket, which was a high-end wood casket. Now, mind you, I'm doing embalming for free, viewing for free, dressing for free. Because I'm doing it myself, I could give away those things. Providing her transportation to the country to bury her. $1,500. And that's just covers the casket because she's aged. But she didn't want that. What she wanted to do was to get the money from out of the government's hand, bring it to me, and at some point in time come back and ask for it, which she did. But once you put those funds in the trust account, it no longer belongs to the benefactor, it doesn't belong to me or the person responsible. It is for the specific benefit of their burial. And she asked for that money back, and I told her I couldn't give it to her. And she got irate, went out of the door. But mind you, she signed the funeral pre-need contract, and I had set it up to go to the bank so that she could be on it. She never did. The bank had the funds, and at some point in time, the bank said, we can't worry about it. They took the money, deposited it in an account, used my tax ID number to absorb the interest so that she wouldn't be charged with the taxes. And there it sit until she made such a stink about it. I finally told her I could not give it back to her, but I could give it back to the source. And what I did was went to the bank and got the money and had the bank write a check back to the nursing home that gave it to me. Second instance was similar. Here is a woman whose husband was very prominent, very well. He had lots of benefits for his wife, and they had an overage. And they asked her, what what funeral home did you want to handle your remains? And she said, oh, call my baby Carlos Howard. He knows exactly where he buried my husband, my son, my sister. And I never knew she had a daughter because I think at the time she was estranged. So that's what they did. I sent the nursing facility a contract. They sent that I had signed, and they were supposed to sign it and fax it back. They never did. Well, I think they signed it in order to get the funds, but I never got the copy back. So, in doing so, when the daughter found out that this woman, in fact, she had been removed from her mother's affairs because there was some malfeasance. She was using her mother's money for her own gain and not taking care of the benefits for her mother while she was in long-term care. So what they did was that the Commission of Account intervened and made the nursing facility, the payee, responsible for her funds. And the board said to me, well, you should have gotten this woman, the daughter, to sign. I didn't even know that a woman existed until she complained. I never knew she was existed, but long story short, she did come in and evaluated what was done and said it was nice. Then she came back again and said, we may change the funeral homes because nothing personal against you, but we want to use another funeral home, the family. Now, mind you, now I funeralized this woman's husband, son, and sister, and she called me. So she didn't honor her mother's wishes, so she, and I said fine, and when the time came, she didn't call me, another funeral home called me, and I told them what I needed, get me a death certificate, and I told them that I would charge them a fee for initiating the account and the interest that accrued to it. Came to like, this was like a $7,500 funeral. To me, that's equivalent to most guys' $16,000 funerals. And I knew that this woman would have, I duplicated the types of services that she had for her husband, her son, and for her sister. And gave him the money. I didn't steal the money. The program did exactly what it was supposed to do: protect the assets of the benefactor. And they said that I should have gotten the money, the people to sign. And you can't make people do what they're supposed to do. And then they used a case to justify it by a gentleman by the name of Ambrose, who was alleged to have taken at least $40,000 or $60,000 from pre-need accounts that he never deposited. And they used that and included his case in mind to justify summary suspension to make it look like that I had taken these people's money. Ambrose died. It killed his whole family. Ambrose died, I think, shortly after he was in prison. His father died. His mama died. This whole thing killed him. What I'm saying is that the punishment that they meted out for me wasn't justified for the charge. They just wanted my license to stop and hoped that I would go away. Now, with all of this, I'm a radio broadcaster, and I'm very much involved in the community. Governor Terry McAuliffe would constantly be on my radio show. Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northern constantly be on my radio show. I know that the influence that I used in certain areas would help them move over. The Attorney General, Mark Heron, he wouldn't have gotten elected. I sent word through his people several times that he needed to come and get involved in our community. He didn't. So I took it upon myself to use what little influence I had. I didn't do that to expect any political favors. I never do. These guys have tried to pay me. In fact, our recent demise of former city treasurer Tom Moss, I used to let these guys use my radio show to get support. I mean, he reached in his pocket and pulled out a fistful of money to give me, and I pushed it back on it. And I was really offended by him trying to pay me. I do this because it's the right thing to do. I've always done it. My parents taught me how to do it. So that being said, when I met with the governor's chief of staff to let him know what was going on. He had arranged for the governor's attorney to hear. They turned their back. They never. Now, I wasn't asking them to undo anything. I wanted them to look at the fact of my 14th Amendment being violated. But nobody wants to believe that the almighty appointed board members, and these guys get these appointments because they are friends of politicians. And they make heavy contributions to them. They didn't do it. I talked through a friend of mine, Linda Bryant, who is Assistant State Attorney General. She wouldn't look into it. This guy, Schlesman, who is the state's Commonwealth Attorney, he said that Mr. Howard has been to the board 5 times. All of the times that I've been to the board was something trivial. And the first time, I've never had any trouble until they came and said that I was in violation of the law by selling caskets online. What law? And do you know that they changed the law saying that you now could only have 1 manager, whereas I had 3, because I didn't want to put my caseload on 1 person because they were elderly. And you're doing 360 some odd funerals a year in Norfolk, and you're a newcomer, that's a lot of work. And then the managers that you have are in excess of 70. Mrs. Velma Johnson and Emmanuel Smith, and then Vanessa Harris. They all agreed. Vanessa backed out because somebody had put pressure on her. She may say to the contrary, but she never, so it was reduced to that, and they had to let me do it because there was no laws against it. So after all of this, they went and changed the law. So they've changed laws, and even it's so in several of these trade manuals that how the casket company changed the laws in terms of shipping so that it would impact me and my ability. I'm saying this, that I know that I provided services to this community, to the poor who ordinarily wouldn't have had services. I mean, a complete funeral for $1,000. I mean, that includes casket and everything else at the cemetery. Most cemeteries cost more than my funeral, and we do all the work. So these individuals on that board, and I'd hate to say conspired, but they did, because all of the evidence that I have from this previous lawsuit indicates it, and it does to this day, that they wanted the license to stop me. And they did it in such a way so that I would never, or hope that I would never bring this out. But thank God for social media and my friends who are doing this for me. So, on that note, this for me brings closure. I've never had my day in court. It's been virtually 3 years since I've had an income. Nobody will hire me. None of the other licensed practitioners will come in to run my company because they have been told that if they do so, that they're going to be prosecuted. So it's like I have leprosy. They foreclosed on my facility because I couldn't operate it, nor did they tell me I had the right to an emergency status until a year later when that expired. I brought in a manager whom they got to him and he quit under contract. No use of suing him because what's he have? He's not responsible for it. They put pressure on it. So the people who hold my mortgage, Furniture Classics, they when I got sick, on a deathbed, they took and they foreclosed the fact that I had filed for Chapter 11, reorganization, and went into congestive heart failure and had the doctors in the hospital to notify the trustee that I was in the hospital and I couldn't make the hearing, and which was already set. They agreed to it, but the clerk, at the behest of Doug Rick's attorney, which is my mortgage holder, private source, because the banks won't lend me money. Now you're doing better than close to $1 million a year in services, better than $1 million a year. What bank won't lend you money that you've got to? But because that area was redlined, these are all factors that I say that were systemically put in place to reduce the level of competition so that I just happen to be a black American. I don't tout that stuff. I've got too much white folks. My great-grandfather's a white man. My son was born with blonde hair and blue eyes. I have a nephew with blonde hair and blue eyes. Have a niece, 2 nieces with blonde hair and blue eyes. And they're all shades in my family, and they're Indian. So therefore, I don't tout that race thing. But I do know that they expected this black man to roll over and die. And I'm not going to do it. And I pray that those of you who watch this will be encouraged and inspired and know that those individuals who you have confidence in, some who look like you who are black and those who don't, you need to look closely and see what they've done as it relates to your interests. Not just black people, but white, Indian, Chicano, Asian, everybody, Filipino. And these guys, from Governor McCullough to Lieutenant Governor Northern to Attorney General Mark Herring and Linda Brandt to Kenny Alexander. I even notified Congressman Bobby Scott, Congressman Ridgel, and nobody would touch it. They always made it seem like I'm always the bad guy, that I'm the issue. And I'm serving people because I chose to serve the poor. And they got hot, upset, and took my license. It's wrong. I just happen to be black. I ain't mad at the black part. I'm mad at the fact that they violated my constitutional rights through holding a hearing and I not have the right to face my accusers. And they got away with it. They used the Commonwealth of Virginia to put me out of business. And that's what they've done consistently from Herman Valentine to Bishop Willis to Milton Reed to James Gay. Thank you for listening. God bless.
My name is Christine Austin Williams. I am the aunt of Khalid Thorpe. Unfortunately, Khalid Thorpe was killed July 2nd, 2011, and I was asked to handle the services or arrangements for my nephew Khalid. Therefore, I had hired Carlos A. Howard Funeral Services to handle the body for us. I also testified to the state stating that we had no discrepancies, we filed no type of lawsuits regarding how Khalif was handled. Far as we're concerned, we was very pleased with the services that was rendered to us, and we, the family, still stand behind Mr. Carlos A. Howard Funeral Services. Thank you.